Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Josh Packard, Executive Director of Springtide Research Institute. Megan, I was just watching your video about objective mapping. And I know we developed this together over a number of years, but it's amazing to see just how the tool has evolved and advanced, over that amount of time.
Yeah, I know. Thanks. I'm consistently amazed at how this simple concept can be so powerful in research context.
Well, I think the secret here lies not in just the fact that it's a spreadsheet, which it is, as we've been saying, but it's also a tool and a process. And that's what I wanted to ask you about today. Mm-hmm. So a big part of maximizing the utility of the objective map is about getting the right objectives in the right little columns on the spreadsheet, which sounds super easy. But we know from practice that it's not always as straightforward as you might.
It's true.
So how do you do it?
That's right. That's what we spend a decent amount of time on in the beginning, especially with bigger organizations who have a lot of stakeholders involved in the project.
Well, that's what I want to talk about. So that's a lot of managing of different voices. You've got competing opinions sometimes. So what do you do to get those really clear objectives out of people? I mean, if you saw the first video that I did in the series, then you know that often people have a lot of very strong feelings about their programs.
They do.
But somehow these need to get translated into clear, concise, and measurable objectives. So what's the secret?
Right. Well, we don't want feelings to drive a research project.
Sure.
So it really comes down to a couple of things. First, you need really good discovery questions. In the objective mapping video earlier, I talked about that discovery process and showed a couple of those examples we'll talk about again this time. And second, in those objectives, you need verbs. And then the last thing is, finally, you need sign off, literally.
Literally.
Yes.
Okay, so we're not going to hopefully get into a whole grammar discussion about nouns and verbs and parts of speech.
Oh, no.
I was an English major, but that takes me to a dark place. So maybe you can just start us off with some examples. So what are some of those questions, some of those thought starters that you use with clients to get them to put the right objectives in the right columns?
Yeah, well, before we even dig into the questions, Josh, we ask our clients and their groups to be in a problem-solving frame of mind by thinking about their answers to the questions as I want to know X because of Y. And that Y ends up turning into the verb that drives the objective. And I'll give you an example here.
Perfect.
Right. So just a few of our most conversation-provoking questions include, what do you picture for the next 5 years? And an example of what a client could answer here is, I want to know X, who our membership is, because why, it will help us understand how to develop future programming.
That's immediately actionable.
Immediately actionable.
That's great.
Another example is, what are your major goals? It sounds like a simple question, but it leads to things like the X, what people are interested in learning more about why, so that we can become a premier resource in education materials. So becoming is the verb used in that future objective.
And I think a lot of times people, if you've got 10 people around the table, you might have 10 ideas about what your goals are, right?
It's
So
true.
even just saying them all out loud can be a big start.
Exactly. And then another example of a question is, what needs to be fixed immediately? And this is a good one because everybody has their own things to weigh in on about that. And an example of how a client might answer is, I want to know X, what people are unhappy about with product delivery, why, so that we can create a better process.
Sure. Well, that makes sense. Well, I'm sure there's an art to it and that it gets easier, but I think what you described here is really doable. I mean, there's a secret to it that helps to have these examples, but this is not undoable, right? This is not the most complex thing ever. It's just about doing some simple things in the right order.
Exactly.
And I think that's really key here. It strikes me, though, that this wouldn't always lead to something that could be actionable. As you get answers to these questions, people tend to speak in sentence fragments.
Right, exactly.
So how do we get them into that action space?
Exactly. And so that's where that second part comes in, and we need to get the verbs into the picture.
Sure, here's the verbs.
Right. So that I want to know X because of Y thinking process during discovery helps us find the verbs that we need as we set the objectives. For example, we don't just want to set an objective as values of young people.
Right.
We want to set it as create a program based on the values of young people so that we can take action with that after we've done data collection and analysis.
Because we've got the word create. We know what we're trying to do.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
That's if you don't remember, verbs are your action words, right? Nouns, person, place, thing.
He
right?
promised
That's
there
all
wouldn't
I
be a
know.
grammar
That's
lesson.
the end of it. Okay. Last, you mentioned to literally get people to sign off on it. And by literally, do you mean figuratively?
No, I
You
mean
mean
literally.
literally. Okay.
Exactly. If you've done your discovery questions and made them actionable, then you're probably 90% of the way there, but your objectives will still likely need to be tweaked a little bit. And this is where you need to get all the key decision makers to look at the objectives. offer any needed alterations, and ultimately they put their actual signature on it to say that they agree.
And I think one of the things that you said here that's really key that I don't want to just gloss over is the decision maker. So this isn't everybody.
Right.
This is the group of people, and for your organization, it means everybody. Yeah. Like maybe your organization's not that big.
Right.
But you also have to recognize like who's really going to own this, and making sure though that all of those people sign off on this.
Exactly. I think it's really important to signal to everyone that the leadership and the decision makers are bought into this process and that they agree with it, and that you're going to support what happens with this project. Once they put their signature on it, there's no hiding, no undermining. Your name is on it. Even if you're the only person who makes the decision, I still think that it's important to sign it. In many cases, we recommend designing this in some way, posting it publicly, like in your building or on a remote work platform like Microsoft Teams, so everyone in your organization or program can see it.
Well, you mentioned tweaking before even getting to the signatures. That sounds to me like we're just going back to the beginning again.
Not if you do it correctly. One of the rules we implement at this point is that changes can only be made for the sake of clarity. So there's no going back to being vague or fundamentally changing any of the content. The key question that guides this entire part of the process is, does the change I want to make lead to more clarity? If the answer is no, then it's not a change you can make at this point.
Like maybe it's actually for a different research project.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good way of keeping it on scope.
Right.
So to speak.
Exactly.
Well, that makes a ton of sense. So just one last question. There appears to be as much art here as like actual science or methodology. Can non-researchers really do this on their own?
Yeah, absolutely. They certainly can. It's one of my favorite things about this tool. Keep it simple and anyone can use it. Like I demonstrated with the very simple questions in Discovery. They're pretty straightforward. If it gets really complex or if there are a lot of organizational politics involved, then you might want to get an outside facilitator to help with the process and depersonalize things. And that's often where we come in. But it can certainly be done by people with little or no research background. And we've seen it work.
Fantastic. And we call this our $1 million discovery process because we know that if you do discovery right, you can fix it in design. If you saw our last white paper, you know what I'm talking about here, and set yourself up for funding for years to come. But this process isn't without its pitfalls. In the next video, I'm going to talk to you about the hope crash, why it's so damaging, and what you can do to avoid it.